right, so here's a quick video. It's an introduction to beeswax candle making, and I've melted my beeswax in my little aluminum foil pan. All right, so next what we'll do is I'm going to show you how to make the swirl party candle today. The other ones will be the Always With You travel candle, which is small like that. And then we'll have one that'll end up being like this. So you'll end up with three: small, medium, large. Actually, these are all three small. Okay. So basically this is, as I said, introduction to beeswax candle making. Kim, this is pretty much for you, so you can get to using your kit that you received via U.S. Postal Service. And I'll say hi real quick, even though I'm not really fit for camera today. All right, here we go. No worries. So the first thing we're going to do, I already cleaned my glass to clear it and make sure there's no residue in the bottom. And so the first thing to do is find our wick. This is square braid cotton wick. You'll feel that it's square instead of round, and that helps. It's very good to use square braid cotton wick with beeswax. So we'll take the string of wick and dip it into, let's see if we can show this. Just gonna dip it into the wax so that the beeswax soaks into the wick fully. And then we'll bring it up, let the drips drip back into the pan so you don't mar your work surface. If you have a piece of parchment paper, that would be great. Right, so I have my primed wick, soaked up beeswax. And the reason I prime the wick is so that it stands up when you put it in your candle, and also you can straighten it out as it's cooling off. You don't have to do this, but it's easier to work with the wick when it's primed. I call it primed. And so in larger candles, sometimes it helps reduce the little dips that form in the middle of the candle, because the wick is here and it's already got wax on it. It won't absorb more later on where there's a well in the middle of your candle. That's probably more appropriate for big candles. Anyway, these little candles we're making today, these small container candles, are very simple actually. Okay, so I like to prime the wick, and then as it cools off, it gets stiff. You can use it even if it's still warm. All right, so I'm going to find my wick tab. This is the little aluminum or tin wick tab, right? And obviously there's a stem that sticks up. So we're going to thread our wick. If you have some sharp scissors or some floral shears, you can cut this at an angle and it will be easier to thread into your sustainer tab. All right, so we just thread this through like so. I'm going to pull mine all the way down to the bottom so that I can take my needle nose pliers and so at the needle nose pliers, I'm basically bringing my wick all the way down to the very bottom, pretty much so it's flush. With the bottom of the wick tab, sustainer tab. I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and I'm going to crimp. I'm going to squeeze this very firmly so it crimps the metal and pinches it onto the wick. This is very important, otherwise the wick will just pull right out. And so it curves the bottom of the tin when this happens. So I usually just kind of flatten it back out a little bit. All right, so if you give it a tiny little tug, you'll see if it's on there firmly enough. Okay. And then I have a double-sided glue dot in my candle kit, several of those. So we'll take it off and place the wick tab firmly in the center. Even if it's not completely centered, like mine's not exactly centered, that's okay, it'll still work. We try the best we can. Take the other part off. So now you have your double-sided, high heat-resistant glue dot. We're gonna take it and we're gonna center it right. Make sure you're centering the metal part as much as you can in the middle, even if it's off center on the glue dot. So you take your bamboo skewer and tamp down the, tamp. Press these little depressions in here. There's three little depressions. You can just press down to make sure that you get as much of the glue dot sticking to the bottom of your tin sustainer tab as possible. So it's down in the center, very firmly adhered to the bottom of the container. Okay, so I'm leaving my wick long because I don't want to waste it. I want to cut off just the amount that I need for this candle, and then I'll still have more wick in a nice piece for my next candles that I'm going to make. Okay, so if you cut them ahead of time, sometimes there's little waste along the way. And when you're making lots and lots of candles, that adds up, right? Waste not, want not, candles and gifts. Next, you'll find your handy dandy toothpick spacer. It's basically two toothpicks that's put together with a piece of tape. So I take the ends apart. I separate the toothpicks apart like this, and I put them around, kind of separate them so there's space like this. And then I can just put it right over the wick in the middle. I'm gently, I don't want to tug on that wick too much because I don't want it to pull out of the tab. So I am going to just flatten these toothpicks out so they're side by side, and I'm going to center my wick right in the middle. I'm going to release this. When you make these two toothpicks go side by side, it kind of puts a little tension on the middle of the wick. I can just move it out of the way and push it down a little bit like this, so that if I push one side down, then I have space on the other side where I can pour the wax right here. Okay, so for this candle, since there's a wavy top, I put one side of the toothpick on the low part, and I put the tips of the toothpicks on the high side, on the other side, so that it will help the wick stay in place when I pour the hot wax in there, and it won't fall over. So we're going to do that now. All right. I have pretty tough hands, and this wax is not, even though the wax is hot, the aluminum foil is not hot, in my opinion. This isn't hot to me at all. Okay, so I just have made a point on the corner of my aluminum foil pan, and I'm going to try to gently pour into this space right here on this side of the candle. Okay. All right, here we go. Peace, love, and happiness. I'm making a nice thin little spout, pouring the beeswax just to the top edge. Top inside edge of this candle. Okay. So, it looks like my wick is still pretty centered. You have some time to adjust this gently. We just don't want to mess with it too much because we don't want to slosh the hot beeswax around. The swirl party candle is one of the harder candles to keep the wick centered. It moves around on this wavy top. Okay. There. That's pretty good. I'll see if I can show you. Oh, see, it moved again. That's okay. As it starts to cool, it'll be easier to keep it in place. I mean, you know, perfectionist tendencies. Okay, right there it's staying. Let's see if I can, oh no, there it goes again. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'm gonna bend it over this way. See if I can get it to stay there. Okay, as I said, the swirl top is the trickier one to keep centered. But you have time before it cools to keep it centered. And even if it weren't 100% exactly centered, as you're burning a candle, you can always use your bamboo skewer or your wick centering tool. And there's different tools you can manipulate the wicks and make sure they stay centered. And so for us spiritual types, we have lots of practices for recentering ourselves, so why not for our candles as well? All right, here's what it looks like. Let's see, from the top. You can see it's cooling now a little bit. And the skin is starting to form on the outside. So we'll let that cool for a moment longer. And we will talk about cutting wicks. So, as I said, I call this the swirl party candle because it has a nice wavy top. This would be an example of the, I call it the Always With You travel candle. And it is pretty. So its wick is a little bit too long. You'll see how long that is. That's going to create a really big flame. Too big. So I have my sharp floral shears here. And I'm just going to cut this to about like 1/4 of an inch. See if you can see. Now it's a lot shorter and smaller. You don't really need much more than that because it'll keep the flame at a nice size. Otherwise your flame's going to smoke and be big and all over the place. So once this candle, the swirl party candle, is ready, we will trim that wick as well. So we just let this one cool till it forms a nice skin all the way. It's a uniform yellow, pale yellow color all the way across the top. And I like to leave the candles sitting at least overnight into the next day before I would burn them. But they'll get darker and darker. You'll see this one's pale yellow, and then they get a little bit darker. Hard to tell on camera the difference. So, well, there's a little bit of a difference between the one that is cooling and the one that's already cooled here. All right, so the skin is starting to form on top of this candle. And once that happens and it gets solid, we can gently pick up the wick and take off the toothpick spacer carefully so we don't break the surface of the cooling wax. All right, so this is one that's already burned, and it burned. This one burned very cleanly, and you'll see how much the wick grew over time. It got really long, and that created a big flame, so it created more heat inside the candle and burned a lot of the wax away from the edges of the candle. So this will be the third size in this trio of candles. So we have the Always With You travel candle. It's kind of small. The Swirl Party candle is this one. And then this one's the classic dinner candle with this chunky glass. So it makes a nice set of 3. And anyway, not the polished finished video that I would normally like to have, but I just want to make sure I don't delay too much longer in getting this out. Okay, so let's see if we can see here. It's all solid now on top, and so I can take the toothpick spacer off and I can trim the wick. And then I think that'll be it for now. If you have more questions, you can let me know. But see how nicely this wick stays up because I primed it. It's standing up by itself. So I'm going to gently pull apart these 2 tips of the toothpicks, pull them apart and lift so I don't tug on the wick, and you'll see the top is still beautiful and it's not cracked. Sometimes beeswax will crack when it's cooling, but this one so far is doing really well. All right, so this will get you started. Let's go ahead and I'll trim this even though it's not completely cool yet. I'm going to trim it with my sharp floral shears from Ace Hardware. And see, now that it's cool, it's not, even though it's hot on the inside, I can still move my candle around and it's not really going to hurt anything. I just want to be careful. So, all right, so this one I'm trimming. See, now I have this beautiful piece of wick that can be used for more candles. We just trim off what we need as we go. As I said, this is pretty simple process. Okay. So there it is, the Swirl Party candle. And it will burn very nicely for you. Juliana Sproles, signing out. Shine bright, be well.